we are going to be going over Civil 3D. It's built on top of AutoCAD, so all of your basic commands are in here, but you get to play around with a few neat tools. Right now I have a subdivision up on my screen. Kind of some line work here. This is actually a project that one of our own Autodesk employees was a part of. You might notice that there is this neat toolbar down here. It's a tool space toolbar. Don't really see that in AutoCAD. It's one of those civil tools. Before I actually keep going, I wanted to kind of just mention this is not going to be a replacement for training. I'm really just kind of showing what Civil 3D can do. So this is not a take as best practices or use this in lieu of training. If you need that, definitely you should go and get that. But without further ado, let's get to it. So like I mentioned, this is line work for a project that one of our Autodesk employees was working on. All this line work is geo-referenced. When you're working in normal AutoCAD, sometimes the location doesn't really matter. When you're working in Civil, it's very nice to actually know where your line work is located in the real world. So this line work is geo-referenced. Now this beautiful black background at the back doesn't really do it much justice, so let me turn on the map so you can see that I wasn't lying. This is actually somewhere out in the world. This project was actually already completed. That's why the line work kind of shows up nicely and overlaps where it should in the real world. You can actually see all the houses in there, roadways. What I did over here was I actually just turned on the Bing map, and it's just an overlay so you can see your map in the background. For now, I'm going to turn this map off just because for the features that I'm going to be showing, it's going to get a little bit in the way. First thing that I'm going to go through, points. So AutoCAD does have points. Your points, just exactly what it sounds like. It's a point, has an XYZ value. However, in Civil 3D, we use COGO points, short for coordinate geometry points. They're a little bit different from those normal AutoCAD points. You could have plenty of properties associated with them. So you could have point numbers, point names, descriptions. So if you are surveying out in the field, you can bring in points with descriptions. You can tell them apart. So you can do top of curb, bottom curb, center line of the road, etc. So COGO points do allow you to have a little bit more customization. And they also let you have them outside the file, whereas in AutoCAD, they're inside your AutoCAD file. This guy actually only has one point in it. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to insert a bunch of other points. I'm going to go here. Before I do that, actually, let me isolate this so that you could see the points better. I'm going to hide these guys because we're not going to be using them for now. Go here. And now it's bringing in those COGO points. Give it a second to go through it here, and there you go. So there's a bunch of points here. If I were to turn the line work back on, it kind of, this is the topography for that line work that I was showing you. So had it in a separate file, brought it in. Now that we have these points in here, you could select them individually. They're not like a point cloud. They all don't belong together, one big entity. You could actually go in there, see some of the stuff that I was mentioning. So you have your point numbers, raw descriptions. These don't have descriptions, but if you wanted to add that in there, you could. You can play around with how they look. What I'm going to do right now, create a point group for them just to keep ourselves a little bit organized. Like I mentioned, COGO points do give you that ability to organize your points so they're not just floating around. So I'm going to create this one. I'm going to make this guy EG for existing ground. Points now, I'm going to keep that the same. For points to include, I'm going to select them in here. All my points are selected. The reason that this has that too is because if you remember that there was that one point already in the drawing, so didn't select it because it's somewhere off in space. So right now, I'm going to include these guys. So now we have, crank through it over here. and notice that it changed the way that it looked. Now why? We're actually going to touch on this a little bit later, and in AutoCAD you also have a little bit of this, or actually this is actually a pretty prominent feature in AutoCAD as well, but styles. So the styles that I used for existing grade, I just used some basic styles. If I were to go to point group and bring this guy back up, it would change back to how they look like before. So for now, I keep those points up there. I'm actually going to create one more point group. Give it a second here. Create one more. We're going to make this no-show because later on this is going to be a lot of data up on our screen. So I don't want that. Copy this guy. As I had mentioned, there's we have styles in Civil 3D. I'm going to go into it a little bit more later, but just to show you points, not jump all over the place. I'm going to turn everything off for this style so that once I want my points to go away, I have that option. For now, not going to go down that road though. So I have all these points, great. What do I do with them? So now that I have all these points, all this data, I can actually go in and create a surface. So what are surfaces? Surface is kind of exactly what it sounds like. If you have a ball, it's the surface of the ball. If you have a table, the top of the table is your surface. In this case, all these points make up the topography, so that's going to be our existing ground surface. To create the surface, tool space, as I had mentioned before, this is a very, very handy tool down here. So I'm going to right-click on surface, create surface. You're going to notice me going down here a lot. You can do a lot of stuff through your tool space. Change the name over here to existing ground. Actually, now I'm just going to make it EG for short. Great, so now I have surface, but it doesn't really include anything in there. If I were to go into the surface itself, to surface properties, there's nothing in there. So this is where I'm going to play around with the definition of it. And I actually want to add my EG point group in there. So it has all those points in there. Now if I were to go back and select the surface, you can see that it actually started populating with information because I just added all of these points in there. Now you're probably wondering, well, great, now where is that surface? I don't think it's showing right now. Let's go in here, surface. Let's see, apply. Alrighty, so here's surface. This is what we actually just created. Now, if you remember before, I actually created a no-show point group, and this is where it's going to come in useful. I'm going to go back. It should be there. No. So what ended up happening was it didn't take my no-show style. Come on. Turn everything off. I don't want them to show. Huh. Let's see if I can get them to go away. So that's the original. Bring this guy back up. Huh. All right. Well, points aren't going away, but that's fine. We can leave them in there for now. We have our surface created. This is kind of one of the most basic objects in there. Once you have your surface, you can actually go on and start creating your design. Your surface is, it gets referenced in by a bunch of other stuff that I'm going to mention down the line, such as your alignments, profiles, assemblies. Right now, this might not mean much to you, but once you actually get to see what it does, it's actually all pretty cool. Another thing, if you wanted to actually look at your surface, you can select it. You could go to the object viewer and see that I did create this nice surface. I Actually, now I'm remembering why point groups didn't show up. I never added them. Now this should work. There you go. So the reason that the points weren't showing up before was because I actually created a point group and didn't have any points in there. So now this is a lot cleaner. Now we can actually get going on the rest. So now I was mentioning styles a lot. Styles really let you dictate what your drawing is going to look like. With the points that I was using, you could see that it definitely changed very much according to the different point groups that I was using. Let me kind of show you how you can play around with surface properties. Let's say, I don't want all these contours in there. I just change the style, change this. See, this was only border. Now if I wanted to do 1 to 5, 1 foot and 5 foot contours, I could do that. I could change the intervals of the contours that are showing. For now, what I actually want to do to show the next part is I only want to show major contours. So I'm going to do this, delete those guys. I'm going to go to display, turn off my minor contours. That's okay. And here are contours at every 5 feet versus every, my minors, which were every foot, and then my majors, which were every 5 feet. You can do this for just about everything in Civil. You can look down here. Before we were playing around in the prospector. The prospector is where you can go in and create stuff, edit. Settings is really where you can go in there and change your styles. So points, point styles, you can play around in here. I actually created a point style, the no-show, so it should be in there. This is the no-show that I had created before. So this is kind of something that you would do in your template in the very beginning. So if you're working at a company, sometimes you'll have your company template so that everybody in your office has the same look and feel to your drawings. This is very useful when you're submitting plans, to a government agency. A lot of them like to have the plans in a specific way every time. So this is kind of something that you would set up once and not really worry about. You would save it, create your styles, save it as a template. So you also have these in AutoCAD, but you would just save it as a DST, or DWT, sorry, right down here. And then you would just use that as your template as you, progress. And then you don't have to worry about doing it every single time. So now we have this beautiful surface in here with 5 foot contours, similar to AutoCAD and AutoCAD LT. There's some labels in here, except that there are some additional options. You can add labels to your surface. So for now, the reason that I took away all those contours was to show you how you could just easily go in there. So I selected add labels, went to surface, contour single, just select in here, and you can see how I'm labeling all those contours, and it's all dynamic. So the the surface, it has those contours in there, it has that information, and as I had mentioned, they're at 5 foot intervals. And if you look at the labels, 1,205, 1,210, 1,215, like it actually is populating correctly. You don't have to go in there and do it one at a time. You can also just do multiples. So I'm going to just draw this line. What this is going to do is every time that the line that I'm drawing intersects with a contour, it creates a label at that point. So many ways to go about it, but easy way to show information so that people know exactly what you're trying to show in your drawing. Alrighty, so now we have our surface. Actually, let me show you one more thing. You can definitely play around with your surface. You could, now that we've created it, it doesn't mean that it's set in stone. Right now I'm going to draw a polyline just to show you some cool stuff that you could do. Have this polyline in there, great. What am I going to do with it? You could add boundaries to your surface. So if it's a huge surface and you only want to focus on one spot, go in here. You could add boundaries, so just let's add the test boundary. here, and now I cut my surface. These guys were out there, and now since I did cut my boundary, or I did cut my surface, there's no more data out here. So these labels, since they were dynamic, it's like, hey, there's no more contours out here, so what are we? It's just, it still says it's a label, but there's no information, so it doesn't know what to label out there. Alrighty. So now I'm going to bring back my line work. So I'm going to end my object isolation. This is pretty busy in here. Bear with me for a little bit. You have the surface in the background. Don't really need to show it right now. So I'm going to go back, surface properties. I'm going to make it no display. So now it's gone. If you do want to get it back and you're like, oh no, I can't select it, just go back to your prospector. It's going to show up here unless you deleted it from the drawing. You could always just find it in here and then go surface properties and change it again. But now we have our line work. So the cool thing about Civil 3D is that you could make, you hear corridors and, well, what are they? So it's your roadway. That's really what the corridor is. So it's kind of split up into 3 separate sections. You have your horizontal design, you have your vertical design, and then you have your cross sections. So right now I'm going to start off with the horizontal design. Horizontal design is what's called your alignment. Alignment can best be thought of as your center line. So if you're ever driving down a street and you have your double yellow line, you can think of that as your alignment. For now, I'm going to use this guy, conveniently placed right here. I'm going to make that into an alignment. Notice how, if I were to go here, there's no alignment in my drawing. So I'm going to go to the Home tab, under Alignment, create alignment from object, select that object. It's going to ask me what direction I want my alignment to go. That doesn't really matter for now. This window will populate or come up. You can decide what you want to name your alignments. A lot of companies have naming conventions, so depending on what that is, you might name this something differently. But for now, I'm just going to do proposed roadway, center line. You can play around with the design criteria. So if you have your AASHTO book and there's certain criteria that you need to follow. It's in here. You can decide sites. I'm not going to touch on sites right now though, but alignment style, since this is a new alignment, I'm going to use that proposed style. And I'm going to keep most of these pretty default. Now you'll see that I have that red line turn into this green line, and I was like, well, great, now it's green. What's the difference? Now, if I were to go to the tool space down here, you could actually see that my proposed roadway is here. You also see that it labeled. So there's stations over here. Your station 0 plus 0, 0, 1 plus 0, 0. Best way to think about that, it's in hundreds. So from station 0 to station 1, that's 100 feet. From station 1 to station 2, it's 200. And, well, 1 to 2 is 100 feet. So the labels are dynamic. So if I were to change this guy over here, so notice that it's at station 1042. If I were to, let's say, put him way out here, it went to 1152, 1130. I can bring them all the way out here if I wanted to. I can't even read what that says, but definitely not the same as before. Now let's go back, make this perpendicular so that we align nicely. Come on. There you go. Alrighty. So we have our alignment. This is kind of where I mentioned you have your horizontal, so you know that your roadway is going to go down this way. The next part would be to make your profile. So profile is your vertical. So you want to, you're just seeing this from a top view. If I were to rotate this, it's still going to look flat. So vertical design is also pretty important, I would say. So let's go up here, profile, and create a surface profile. So what this is going to do is it's going to take that existing ground that I had before and use that to draw out kind of what our, our elevations are looking like down that alignment. So proposed roadway, that's correct alignment. We're going to select this EG surface, add in here. So now we want to draw in profile. This guy is going to, let's see, that's fine, proposed roadway, matrix grids, that's okay. I'm going to automate all of this so it'll automatically select the stations for us, or if we wanted to create a profile for a specific view, specific number of stations, we could do that. But for now, just from beginning to end. And I'll keep all this the same. Alrighty. So this is our profile. Now it looks like, so since our station 0, let me show you. So we're starting down here. It lines up. So your station 0 over here is your station 0 over here. It looks like we're going from high elevation to lower elevation. So it almost looks like this subdivision was made on like the side of a hill. So you can definitely see what your existing looks like over here. Now let me go back to single view. If you wanted to, you could change what this looks like. Again, that's part of your styles. But if you wanted to, let's just say I want to change this how it looks right now. Select it. I'm gonna edit profile style. You can change what it looks like. So let's say I want to make this green. Make it a little bit easier to see. And go ahead and play around with that to just look exactly how you want it to look. So for now, we just created what the existing is. We haven't actually created our design. So as we did over here, we have our horizontal. So let's start creating our vertical design. So vertical design, you're going to go back to the Home tab, Profile. Then you're going to do the, if that gets out of the way, so Profile Creation Tool. It's going to prompt you to select a profile that you want to use. So I'm going to select this guy. Again, it's going to ask me for the name. So same, we're going to do proposed roadway. So similar to before, you have your design criteria. I'll label it nice, complete label set. You can see everything. And then you have this guy over here. So what this is going to do, it's going to give you all the tools that you need to actually create your profile and get your vertical design down. Let's see. So I'm going to draw tangents. You're going to want to tie in over here. So since this was existing, we're going to be tying into this area. I'm going to definitely want to start there. You don't want to have your roadway like a foot or two above or below where you're supposed to be tying in. So let's keep it like that. Since we're pretty steep, try to make it not too bad, but can't really. That's such a steep grade, it's kind of hard. But let me move this guy around. You can move your profile around. So actually, this is a good thing to point out. All the labels were made, so you could actually see this was your starting grade and your station. You can see the ending grade, so you can see the elevation over here and the station. You can see all the grades, so you have your 4.1%, 0.51. Yeah, this is really downhill. So if I were to move this guys around though, so let's see, 1238, if I were to move this guy, it updates 1240. So all of this is dynamic. It adjusts. So if you decide down the line, hey, I need to change what my vertical design or my horizontal design is going to look like, Civil 3D will go in there and adjust it for you. It also adjusts grades, so you don't have to worry about making making one change and worrying, hey, where else do I have to go into my design and edit so that it makes sense. So let me do this. All right, so this looks like let's go along with this guy right now. You're going to notice that it's just tangents right now. So you have this line going down and it just goes into another line, and then it kind of just ramps over here. You could probably imagine that that would be a pretty bumpy ride if you actually ended up driving down this. So you could make vertical curves. To make your vertical curves, just go over here. So I selected free vertical curve, parabola. So now the next thing it's going to ask is select your entities. What do you want to make a curve? So I'm going to select this guy, select this guy. Now it's going to ask me, what would you like to use as a reference? So you could decide if you want it via K value, your radius. You could change what that curve is going to be. So for now, I'm going to make it. Let's do it 800 so that it's nice and gradual. Make radius. You could actually see that now it's not just a bump. You could actually see that it's a nice little radius, nice little curve, so that it's not as hard. You could also continue doing that for the rest. And each time it's going to ask you, what do you want? How do you want your, do you want to use the same radius? Do you want to change the length? Pass through K. So I'm just going to keep it the same. Use 800. You could actually see that it labeled, the vertical curve for us as well. So sticking over here a little bit. There you go. Yep. So it labels your vertical curves for you, so you don't have to worry about doing that yourself. If I were to change it, kind of similar to before, I have that option, and the label will adjust with it. Of course, you're going to have places like this where it's overlapping. You can just move your label around. It's not set in stone. So yeah, as you can see, you make your edits and it adjusts as you're making them. So now is probably a good time to start talking about, as you're progressing through your project, you have this is, the green line was the existing topography. Our blue line is our design. Since we're going so downhill, you could probably imagine that it's going to be a lot of fill in this area. You can't just build your roadway on top of air. So that's one way that you might want to start considering changing your vertical design. If you wanted to actually figure out what that looks like, actually no, I'm not going to do that one right now. Let me, keep that one in the back pocket. We're actually going to come back to it in a little bit. So we have our horizontal and our vertical design. Now we're going to want to actually make our cross sections so that we know what our roadway looks like. So in Civil, it's called assemblies. Create an assembly. It's in the same home. I'm going to go to assembly, create assembly. So I'm going to do just typical cross section. Keep it basic. It's going to ask me where I want this guy. So now this is the middle of the assembly. So this is kind of where your alignment is. So that horizontal, the horizontal alignment that we were looking at before, that's where this is going to be. This top of this little box over here, that's where your the profile, the one that we drew, is going to be. So now let's see what we want it to look like. So since I'm going to try to mimic the line work that we had earlier. So I'm going to press Control 3. It's going to bring up a tool palette. And from here we can actually choose what to put in. So I want basic lane. You actually have a bunch of options over here. Lanes, shoulders, medians, curbs, daylights, some generic ones. For now, we're going to do lane. Just make a basic lane. Once you select it, you get the option over here to play around with your parameters. So you have these, they're called sub-assemblies. You have these sub-assemblies, but you can play around with them to fit your need. So let's see. I want them to be 14 feet wide. Make the slope, I'm going to keep it at 2. Yeah, that's fine. So it's put in at the right side, so if I select it here, it's going to populate on the right side. Now if I were to select it again, it's going to populate on the left side. So now let's start building out what our typical cross-section is going to look like. If you go to curb, so we have our lanes, 14-foot wide lanes. Let's go to, which one do I want? Let's do urban, curb, gutter, general. So again, similar to the sidewalk or to the lane, you're going to have a bunch of parameters down here. Actually, no, urban, which one? Please. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So you get to choose what your gutter slope is going to be. I'm going to keep everything generic there. Yeah, let's keep that generic. So you have your roadway here, you have your curb here, you have your gutter, curb. Let's go and make a sidewalk. You get to choose the width of the sidewalk. So you'll see, inside boulevard width, sidewalk width, outside boulevard width. You can play around with this. So if you're walking down the sidewalk and you want, let's say, do 9 for us. If you know that you have like 4 feet of grass on the inside of the sidewalk, towards the roadway, you can put that in there. You could also play around with the outside. But for now, I'm just going to make it just a basic 9-foot wide sidewalk. Put it right here. So then next, we have our lane, we have our curbs, and we have our sidewalk. Next, you want to figure out where, how this is going to connect to our original surface. So at end of the day, we're trying to make a design over here. We are going to be placing this somewhere in the world. So how do I tie this guy in to the rest of my existing topography? So that's where you go to daylight. Let's do daylight basin over here. So daylight is what I was talking about. You get to choose how what it'll do is it'll slope towards your existing topography. Let's do 3:1. I'm going to do, actually no, let me do daylight general. Which one would I want? Keep it simple. Yeah, let's do daylight general. Go with 0 feet. I'm going to zero everything out. Slope. There, put this here. All right. So what this is going to do is, if our roadway is going to be a cut, it's going to go up till it meets it. If it's going to be a fill, it's going to go down till it meets it. So now that we have this all set up, Now, we're going to have to do it for the left side. Luckily, we don't actually have to go through all those steps that we just went through. You could just select them, right-click, and mirror. Select right here, and it creates it for you. So you don't have to go through the same work and do it twice. So, actually, hold up. Let me make sure that before we continue, because what we're going to do next is we're actually going to create a corridor out of all this. I'm going to delete these guys because these guys are not the ones that I want to be using. I actually want to use this one. This is the guy. Make this 3, make this 3. All these guys is 0. So what this guy will actually do, it'll daylight and then create a ditch for you. 0 everything out. Create that guy in there. Come on. One second while I get this guy going. Three, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay. Come on. All right, are you going to go in now? There you go. Much better. I'm going to do the same that I did before, mirror it over. Okay. To put this away for now. So we have our assembly. So this is the kind of the last piece that we need to create our corridor. We have our horizontal design, our vertical design, and now these are going to be our cross sections. So to create our corridor, I'm going to go in here, like corridor. Go to name. We're going to do proposed road. Keep it standard, or keep it basic actually. Now it's going to ask you, what alignment do you want to use? Luckily we only have one, but if you had multiple, you can select whichever alignment you want to use and whichever profile you want to use. And then over here it will ask you what assembly do you want to use. So I'm going to do typical cross section. That's the one that we just made. Over here, it's going to ask you what surface. So what I had mentioned before about the the daylights and how we're actually going to tie this into real life. This is what it's talking about. So I'm going to have those daylights target this existing surface. Not going to select that. Press OK. And now you're going to notice that there's this pretty cool guy right here. That is our corridor. So now we've actually created our corridor. So this is taking basically our alignment, which is straight across the horizontal, profile vertically, and then each spot where you see those lines, that's where our assembly is placed. So now that we have our corridor, there's a few things that we could use it for. Similarly to before, where we had our existing surface, we could create a surface from our corridor. Go to corridor surfaces, over here, let me create a new one. Top of proposed road. Now I'm going to add this link for the top. I'm going to go to boundaries. I want the corridor extents as my outer boundary so that my surface doesn't go on to infinity. What this will do is, wherever the corridor daylighted to our existing surface, it'll stop it right there. So we have this guy down. Rebuild the corridor. Now you're actually going to see topo because now we have a surface in there. And if I were to select over here in the tool space, you'll see that there's actually a new surface in there. If I were to select it, there you go. So now that we have this surface, what I'm going to do is, I had mentioned earthwork before when I was talking about profiles. We're going to have quite a bit of fill in here because our design surface is above the existing. What I'm going to do is going to start doing some earthwork calculations. However, we don't want to do it from the top because your pavement, it has a width to it, so it's not, if you're going to do your earthwork calculations, you're going to want to figure out from the bottom of your corridor, your cross sections. So I'm going to actually go in and create one more surface, and this one is going to be for the bottom. Properties, actually, yeah, go here, surface, create one more. Do bottom of corridor, and I forgot to do this one before top. Make this one datum, so that's the bottom. Add this guy in there. Since we're doing it at the bottom, my overhang, I'm going to set it to bottom. For our surface style, don't want it to show because it's only really going to be used for earthwork calculations. So what I'm going to do is no display, apply, rebuild once more. So now we have yet another surface. So let's start doing some earthwork calculations. So you can actually go up here, analyze, right in the volume dashboard, and do it all through here. So we're going to create one more surface, tin volume surface. What this will do is, let me name this one earthwork. Don't want it to display. No display, actually no, that's fine. Now we have to choose what, this one's different because we have to choose what surface we want and then what comparison surface. So our base surface is going to be our existing topography, and we're going to compare it to our bottom of corridor. So if for some reason you have, you really don't want to cut or you really don't want to fill, you could change the cut fill factors. I'm going to keep it that way for now. Press OK. And it generated our earthwork calculations over here. Kind of how we mentioned before, there was going to be a lot of fill because our profile is above the existing ground. Now, if I were to go in here and change this, I'd have to, now that I've changed my profile, my corridor is going to be different. So let me go ahead and rebuild the corridor. Notice how my earthwork calculations are out of date. So again, it's very dynamic. You make one change and in another spot, Civil 3D will compensate and figure everything out for you so you don't have to worry about going back and manually doing everything once again. So now we have our earthwork calculations. Going to keep that one to the side. If we were to actually go in here, you'll notice that earthwork created a new surface. Next step for corridors, create your cross sections. So when you're creating your cross sections, the way that it's done is using sample lines. So sample lines, what they really do is kind of like how your assembly was your cross section. The sample line, what it'll do is it'll draw a line across your corridor at certain intervals, which I'm going to show you in a little bit, and just grab all the information that you wanted to get from there and then create section views for you. So start it off, select the proposed roadway alignment, press OK. So now I have this, and it's going to ask, what information do you want from here? So I definitely don't want the bottom of the corridor. So this seems like a pretty good way to go. We're going to do existing ground, proposed roadway, so the corridor, and then the top. So now you could actually see it's a little bit cluttered in there, but now it's asking me where do you want your sample line to go? If I were to go up and down my alignment, the station is updating. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here by range of stations and kind of automate it so I don't have to manually go in and tell Civil, each spot that I want to sample from my corridor. Let's see. So I'm going to keep it mostly the same. You could decide how far left and right you want. That's what the swath width is. So if I wanted to, have one side sample further away from the alignment, which is the center line, I can. I'm going to keep them 30 though. I'm going to add at start and at end. Otherwise, it won't sample at the very beginning of my corridor. Press OK. So now it should have sampled everything. The way that you can tell, go over here. So under alignments, what it really is doing is it's going to sample down your alignment. And if I were to go down here, you can see under alignments, under that proposed roadway, under sample line groups, there it is. And you can see that I have a bunch of sample lines all at separate stations. So now what am I going to do with these? I'm going to actually create my section views. So I'm going to go up here, section views, going to create multiple views. Now it's going to ask me, how do you want your multiple views to be created? I'm going to use that sample line group down that proposed roadway alignment. I'm going to automate everything. Press next. Now this is further down the line, so for production, you can actually select your company template and it'll fill it in accordingly. However, I'm just going to use standards of just normal out-of-the-box stuff in here. And now I'm going to keep everything mostly the same. Yeah, that's okay. Create my section views. And here you go. So these are our cross sections. So over here, that is the corridor, and down here is the surface. So the existing topography. If you notice that the corridor is above, that means that you're probably going to be doing fill, which is what we are going to be doing a lot in this, design. If you notice it below, you can actually see over here the lines are going down because it's coming downwards to meet the existing topography. So now we have our cross sections all ready. We're going to go to actually calculating our materials. You can go into, again, output. Actually, no, it's under analyze. Computing materials. We're going to use roadway, SL1. So what this does is we figured out what our cut fill is before. If you wanted to figure out specific materials, you can go in here. I'm going to do a material list. Now, what this is telling me over here, it lets me select the pavement material because that is what the lanes were. So I'm just going to keep this on road pavement 1, base material, road base, sub base material. Keep all that. Calculate it out. So this is pretty good if you want to figure out like how much pavement you're going to need. Do material volume table. It's like after you compute the materials, you want to make that table including all that information. So here, I'm going to keep that all pretty normal. Pavement, select material. So I'm going to do it for pavement. I'm going to keep it dynamic, press OK. And this is a kind of a breakdown of how much material you're going to need between the stations. So it'll tell you, like, from station 0 to 50 or 0 to 1, it'll tell you how much cumulative volume you need. So by the end of it, you know that you'll need this much material. So we're getting towards the top of the hour here, so I'm going to try to cover as much as I can. So let's just get to it. One more thing that you can make. Let's go into pipe networks. So once you actually have your roadway, you might want to figure out how to get rid of all of your rainwater. Create a pipe network. I'm going to use basic stormwater. So for the surface name, you're going to do the top of proposed road because that is what it's going to be there once it's all done. Alignment name, proposed road. I'm going to keep these like this, length, description, slope. Press OK. So now once you select that, you can actually go and start to decide what pipe structures you want, or what structures you want in your drawing. For this one, I'm going to do 24 by 24, so those are going to be my inlets. I'm going to do 15-inch concrete pipe. So now it's going to ask me, just put in your insertion points. So notice how it's starting to label everything. So I could have like up here. Of course, this isn't how you would actually do it. You would definitely, if you were creating a project, you would definitely want to do some more research, but I'm just kind of showing what it can do. You'll have a bunch of labels. You can play around with where the labels are placed so that they're not all on top of each other. You could also edit the pipe structures themselves so that it can line up. Let's give Civil a minute to think here. Yeah, Civil's thinking right now. Something's happening. I'll give it a few more seconds here to see if it populates. But while we're waiting, what I kind of wanted to bring across in this one was, you create your pipe network. What you could actually do later on is go into your sample lines, add this pipe network so it'll actually show up under the data that you can sample. And then once you go back to section views, you could add this pipe network into your section views and it'll show up in those cross sections. So you don't have to go in and again manually do it. You could just have it automatically populate in for you, and you don't have to worry about going back and forth and doing the same work multiple times.